this is Vince Miller. Thank you so much for joining me for this devotional. Today we are in Galatians chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 3 through 5. Here's what the text says. But even Titus, who is one of Paul's proteges, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us into slavery, to them we did not yield in submission even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. Now, for those who don't know Paul very well, he had a couple of very well-known proteges. One was a man named Timothy, and the other was a man named Titus. Both at some point worked and traveled with Paul in ministry. Now, here's the nuance. He required Timothy to be circumcised before he traveled with him, but he didn't require this of Titus. And he required this of Tim because he was half Jewish and half Greek, and he wanted to avoid unnecessary issues since circumcision should have actually been done when he was a kid. But this was not the case with Titus. Titus was a Greek, a full Greek. So he stood his ground on this requirement with him. But what I want to do here is I want to note the tone here, because Paul makes 5 really strong indictments against the church here. He says, first, Titus was not forced to be circumcised. Number 2, he says, yet because of false brothers secretly brought in. Third, he says, to spy out our freedom. Fourth, that they might bring us into slavery. And fifth, we did not yield in submission. Now, keep in mind, these are indictments against religious people in the church, fellas. And some of it's some pretty strong language. I mean, Paul describes them as religious fakes, undercover spies, and oppressive masters that have intentionally designed, implemented, and enforced rules over and above the gospel. He calls them out because he cares about the freedom of the truth. And I think it's beautiful. But I got to say this. I think the church will always battle issues like this because sin is insidious in nature. Even well-meaning Christian people can get drawn into sinful patterns. And the sinful patterns of righteous people are elusive and sometimes hard to initially see. You know, inside the walls of a church, we will pass over the unspoken rules and even the spoken methodology weighed upon us by others. And initially, we will accept it as good. We believe that maybe they're an appropriate means of enforcing discipline or casting vision, until we discover that over time they end up constricting our freedom in Christ. They're like a noose around the neck that gets tighter and tighter and tighter over time. Insiders refer to it as the first church way, or just insert whatever your church name is there. And we blindly follow, assuming our leaders know what's best for us. Yet over time, we discover that the first church way takes precedence over Jesus's way. And then you no longer hear Jesus's name in church, only a church name. And I've seen this happen time and time and time again over the last few decades. You know, I think Paul understood the insidious nature of this particular sin, and here's why. He was a legalist who was guilty of doing exactly the same. But God revealed to him the gospel of grace and invited him to be the spokesperson for his grace. So in places where the gospel was diluted by religious fakes and undercover spies and oppressive masters, he spoke up because he wanted people to know the gospel of grace, not some counterfeit gospel that looked like the gospel, but was no gospel at all. And there is your theme in this book. I want you to stew on this today and think about maybe some places in your life where you have been drawn away by a fake gospel. And I want you to fight against it and speak against it in your own life. Begin there. Begin with yourself before others. That's how Paul did it. He spoke against the gospel of legalism in his own life for a decade before he ever spoke against it publicly. And fellas, speak up when the time is right. I love you guys. Thanks for joining me. I hope this has blessed you today. If it has, share it with someone you know, and I'll see you right back here again tomorrow.